Welcome to everyone who has joined this e-launch of this very special Social and Economic Studies volume on reparation. You can see it on the screen and you can see here a beautiful production, volume 68, numbers 3 and 4. A special welcome to the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies and the Chair of the CARICOM Reparation Commission, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles. And a welcome to Professor Michelle Johnson from York University in Canada, who will launch the volume officially, and all the other speakers who will be introduced to you in due course. I welcome those on Facebook, as well as those who are on YouTube and this Zoom link. This special issue has been about 2 years in the making, but it comes at a time when reparation discourses are even more relevant than before, I think. While some positions have softened, perhaps because of the pricking of consciences in the wake of the globalization of the Black Lives Matter movement, others have been hardened like cement. Researching, writing, and disseminating information through publications like this one will help to educate those who are still searching, seeking to understand the justification for the reparation movement. So congratulations to Ms. Annie Paul, Managing Director, the editorial board, the CARICOM Reparation Commission, and the Center for Reparation Research, and all the contributors who made the publication possible and saw it through from idea to publication and now this launch. And he wanted me to let you know that hard copies are available over the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies at the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies' publication section. And it is available online, and I'm going to ask Floyd from the Center for Reparation Research to put up the link, place the link in the chat, but I'll make an attempt for those who are challenged in terms of seeing what is written. So it is https://www.mona.uwi.edu/ses/. So we will that will get you the journal, because in this time of COVID, we haven't been able to send out copies to some people. Before I go any further, I also want to tender apologies from Ms. Jody Ann Quarry, who was one of the first research assistants in the center to begin to work on this volume with me. As you know, she's now host of the morning agenda on Power 106. But she worked on the volume with me in the first year of preparation, and of course with Ms. Annie Paul. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Professor Sir Hilary Beckles to deliver his message. Of course, I invite you, before I even do that, to join me in congratulating him on his award of the Martin Luther King Jr. Day, on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, of the MLK Jr. Global Award by the National Action Network in the USA. And many of us saw that live. So congratulations to the Vice Chancellor. I think you can, in the reaction, put up your applause. I'll start off. There we go. So Sir Hilary Beckles is Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, UWI. He has a distinguished career as an academic international thought leader with many reviewed essays in scholarly journals and about 13 published books. I don't know if I'm counting right, Professor. So Hilary is also a United Nations Committee official and a global public activist in the field of social justice and minority empowerment. He is the chair of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, and under his guidance, the UWI has established the Center for Reparation Research. And it was one of the early conversations in a CRC meeting that started this whole process of getting this volume. So Professor, Vice Chancellor, Chair of CRC, over to you.
Thank you so very much, Professor Shepherd. It is a tremendous honor to be a part of this exercise today. Um, I recognize all of my colleagues, and we are all here to celebrate this production of Annie Paul, and to thank her as editor of Social and Economic Studies, the flagship journal of the University of the West Indies. And she really has done an extraordinary job. She has been very patient with all of us contributors, and she has been extraordinarily skillful because, you know, one of the features of persons participating in this reparatory justice movement is that you're all involved in doing so many other things, and then you have to somehow find some hours to put a paper together, and it's distracting you from doing all of the other things you have to do. So she has been patient. But it is, as Professor Shepherd indicated, this is an enormous milestone. It is a great contribution to the literature on the Western modernity and the reparatory justice struggle. It is a milestone in the sense that it is one of the very earliest special editions of journals. I know that there have been some journals globally that have tried to pull the literature together in an organized fashion, but this is the first coming out of the Caribbean that is represented by some of the finest scholars on this subject in the world. And so it is indeed very, very special. And all of the contributors have written excellent presentations. I've had the pleasure of reading them all. And I can say to you that what I did was to choose a moment when I was on a long flight where I could be left alone in peace to read all of the presentations, going and coming. And that was a moment of intense concentration. But it is a literature of justice. It is part of that global literature that speaks to justice in many forms. The issues of freedom, the issues of humanity, highlighting crimes against humanity. And clearly this fits very nicely into this enormous global literature that is now bending its direction to look at the genocide of the native people, the enslavement of the African peoples, and the deceptive indentureship of the Asian people, and putting all of this into a common narrative. I have determined through my own looking at periods within Caribbean history to say that this moment in which we are in is arguably the eighth iteration of a spike in the reparatory justice movement. This is a movement that has been having spikes and troughs over 300-400 years. In fact, one can say from the very beginning of the Columbus invasion and the indigenous people, you can see a literature emerging about reparatory justice, all the way through the African enslavement period, all the way through that post-independence, post-emancipation restructuring and the challenges associated with that, and the construction of the apartheid system after emancipation. So we can see this rise and fall, but the central theme, of course, is that the people of this region have not given up. After 400 years of demanding it in various forms and various moments, they have not given up, and they have not had the benefit of it, but they know that it is due and that there has to be resolution. And this time around, one has a feeling that the resolve is even more endemic than before. And it has now reached a global dimension in which the Caribbean is a critical part, simply because the world is coming around gradually to realize that all of those crimes committed in Western modernity to build out the capitalist system, the imperial empire, all of them were built upon these crimes against humanity in Africa, in Asia, in Oceania, in the Caribbean, everywhere these crimes were committed. And humanity is saying that they want to have justice for all of these global crimes and all the forms that these crimes took. So this literature is going to mushroom in the years ahead. I do believe that this 21st century, that the greatest movement is going to be the reparatory justice movement. It is going to be the greatest global movement in which cultures and ethnicities all over the world are going to be joining and articulating and coming together. We can see the signs of this. We've heard the language coming out of India. We've heard the language aggressively coming out of parts of Europe now. And Africa is civil society is on the move. And we're gradually asking the states of Africa to come on board in a formal way. So yes, so we can see the infrastructure of a global movement taking form and taking shape. And in Europe, especially in Britain, we have seen the rise of the research of universities and other institutions conducting investigations into their own engagement, involvement in these crimes against humanity. But the trend, of course, in Europe at the moment, in Britain especially, is for universities to do what I describe as research and run. Research and run is now the methodology. Most of those universities have now conducted research into their own history, but haven't done the research. They are running away from it. Most of them are trying to minimize it. The notion of resolution is to offer a scholarship here and a scholarship there, and to offer a fellowship program here. And these minimalist responses and their judgment are meant to settle these matters. And we have been consistently rejecting that, and also rejecting the notion at an activist level that it is absolutely disgraceful to be contemplating that an apology as a public relation exercise and the offering of token gestures of financial offerings to diaspora communities seen as resolutions is terribly embarrassing, humiliating, and rejected from all quarters. So we are getting ready to see Britain, especially in 10 years' time. Britain is going to be celebrating the bicentenary of the Emancipation Act. And already they are getting ready to have a major global public relation exercise, the 200 years of the emancipation legislation. We're going to Parliament, of course, 31, 32, 33, 34. And all of us in the movement will have to hold their feet to the fire that there will be no celebration from societies that have suffered this pain and torture until there is a settlement around the issues of reparations. So we are preparing for the next 10 years as Europe begin to roll out their propaganda, and all of us in the activist environment will have to be very, very vigilant so as to deny them what they're hoping to achieve, which is an ethical and moral high ground for the next 100 years. We have to hold them closely to the fire so that they can speak with integrity, and the people who have suffered these consequences today can have justice. So congratulations to all of the authors. There are really some very fine papers in this volume, and they're skillfully edited and articulated in a way that you can feel the cascading of the historical truth alongside the pedagogy of activism and what is required to be done. So Prof. Shepherd, thank you for guiding this process, and Annie Paul for bringing it to our attention here today, and all of you who are part of this conversation, all authors, editors, bless you and congratulations. This work is going to resonate. So let us get it out there as widely as we can and let it do what it has to do. This is a pebble thrown upon upon the water. And no doubt we will see the ripples globally in the next year or so. So thank you all very much. And it's an honor to be a part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair of the CARICOM Reparation Commission and our Vice Chancellor. And thank you for that fair warning. You have now given us information that will help to drive more activism for the next 10 years. So anyway, thank you also for your role as editor. It was a pleasure working with you and Professor Ahmed Reed, who couldn't be on screen to get this editorial work done. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Kabu Ma'at Keru. The name simply means she who is not afraid to speak truth to power. And through her poems of protest, resistance, liberation, empowerment, and social justice, Kabu Ma'at Keru uses poetry as a critical and crucial tool in realizing her purpose to do just that, speak truth to power. She has published 3 anthologies, Making Kenke from Memory, that was 2018, Jungle Me, Island Heart 2001, and A Tint of Blue, published in 1985. She's an innovative international broadcast journalist, activist for social justice, and media consultant with over 30 years of progressive experience in the media and the communication industry. Kabu completed her postgraduate diploma, her MA degrees in international broadcasting journalism at the University of Central England in Birmingham, and holds the MBA and MPhil degrees in research and business administration from the University of Liverpool. He's a former director of program and administration at Grove Broadcasting Company, RFM, and hosts, and she has done so for like 30 years, the popular Sunday morning Pan-African news magazine program, the Africa Forum, Running African on RFM. So she's going to give us a selection from her Making Kenke from Memory. Over to you, Kabu.
Thank you so much, Professor Shepherd. Thank you so much. And congratulations to you and the team at the CRR for this extremely timely and important volume of the SES. Thank you so much for the positive review also of Making Kenke from Memory. I'm going to be reading the title poem called Making Kenke from Memory. It's in 3 parts. I'll be reading the first part entitled Nkontomire. My mother says she's not African, making Kenke from memory. Crossed leg with tachi fired plantations, pounding nutmeg into empry, cassava, banku, satsa, ugali, kukui. Africanism is paganism. Dem de people unkontomiri. Blasphemy. My daughter will burn in hell. Amen. Adding Hotep. Amen, Hotep. My mother is Jamaican, Anglo-Saxon, Irish Jamaican in Irie footsteps. Ailing ruins by Irish soldiers begun, Jamaican waiting for the dough to tang. My mother beats Ngoma rhythms in a shanty mortar, while my father dreams secretly of Obi and Uganda. Will you take me there one day, my daughter? Pound tunes in Komi, Ugali, Satsa. The blood is Safina, maize must ferment, do not massa, harina curdles, flee. My mother charms beats like djembe lament, Tatu, Baba, Banku, and Ugali. Beats djembe in Kenke from memory. Quivers in tune, Kenke rhythms rising. Tell stories of ancestral victory. Tatu, Babu, Banku in the leavening. Ancestors waiting for the dough to set in. My father goes out to be African. He's Ngoma. He blackens the hulls that makes him boogaraboo in the blood. He is Uganda. Stateless, black and proud, black before Bosumburu for the flood, pride like couscous from the Python Bantu. Tatu, Baba and Ugali, Black Mud, Black a Paradox like Osei Tutu. He takes his chances, grows out G5. Black rhythms, Bata rhythms, Kenke from Black bloodlines. Black power, Serafina, Etheriциtes. My father is drum. Ogini in brine, Sun Sun visions, Asa, Seya, divine. We have come back, black, burning paper prayers in pewter pots, smoke in forbidden spaces, sorrow in the murmur, ancestors' tears, Guru Guru, keeper of Tartar's race. Where God is Pleiadian, they shun libation. Now that you have come, sit down, charm Patrickin from Igbo drums, ancestral veneration. My father goes out to be African. He's Ptah-hotep and Mentu-hotep, made obelisks set papyrus abloom. He's Imhotep, who plots a sundial. Father's womb, father's seed scatters mother's womb, pounding it so, beating maize like fufu. The name is Dokono, Donkon, Banku, drumming it low, pasting corn like cuckoo. The vein is Komi, Koko, Konki, mortar sticks churning Komi tin Dukunu. White stone ground corn meal erases melanin. Do not degerminate, protect the keratin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cabo. That was powerful. And I know we have more to come. I now wish to introduce Professor Michelle Johnson because she's going to officially launch our volume today. Michelle A. Johnson holds a BA honors degree and an MPhil degree in history from the University of the West Indies and an MA and PhD in history from the Johns Hopkins University. She has taught in the Department of History at York University, but as we know, before that, she held a position in the History and Archaeology Department at the University of the West Indies on the Mona campus. In fact, she spent the years 1994 to 2002 at Mona. She has served the York community in a variety of capacities, including as the coordinator of the Latin American and Caribbean Studies program, as York's Affirmative Action Officer, and as a director of the Harriet Tubman Institute for Research on Africa and its diaspora. And she did that from 2013 to 2018. She currently serves as the Associate Dean of Students in the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies at York University. Johnson's research interests and publications focus on Jamaican cultural history and the histories of gender relations, racialization, labor, domestic slavery, and domestic service in Jamaica and Canada. Over to you, Professor Johnson.
Thank you so much, Professor Shepherd. I did what everybody's been doing for all these months. I started to talk before unmuting myself. Thank you so much. I would like to thank especially the organizers in the Center for Reparations Research and the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, both at the University of the West Indies, my home and my alma mater. For the 12.5 million Africans who were wrested from their homelands and enslaved and transported in horrendous conditions in the belly of ships across the Atlantic Ocean, who were deployed as units of labor by the European colonizers within the plantation complex, and their millions of descendants who became the backbone and the lifeblood of the Americas, the time for reckoning with this appalling crime against humanity is long overdue. Legally categorized as chattel, movable, inheritable property, the enslaved people across the entire hemisphere provided an enormous amount of unpaid labor in every possible aspect of economic activity. It was upon their backs that industries were built from which they did not benefit. It was their hands that crafted the impressive legislative buildings wherein laws were crafted for their subjugation. It was they and their children, to whom they had no legal claim, who created the musical and the culinary and the incredibly creative cultures that their oppressors would initially try to silence and then to exploit. It is from these histories and their legacies that the contributors to this volume collectively argue that the call for reparations can and should be made. As this volume makes clear, while these ideas for restitution are not new, they have taken on greater urgency in the last decade. I want to take this opportunity to discuss some of the ideas contained in this special volume, which centers the segment of the Caribbean formerly colonized by Britain and its relationship with that former imperial power, with one article that also focuses on the United States. The guest editors, Hilary Beckles, Vereen Shepherd, Ahmed Reed, begin with an extremely useful and comprehensive overview of the historical forces that resulted in the dissemination of the region's indigenous peoples, the enslavement of Africans, the indentureship of Asians, and the underdevelopment of the region. And they discuss the history of the movement for reparations. Beckles' chapter provides critical details about the historical context of enslavement in the Caribbean and the ways in which Europeans benefited from chattel slavery. It outlines the growing political recognition and organization around the need for reparations and focuses on CARICOM's 10-point plan for reparatory justice, which emphasizes societal and regional redress and removes us from the caricature of individual compensation, which is often launched against the movement for reparations. With their foci on the labor, abuses, and resistances of enslaved women, as well as the benefits that accrue to women in the enslaving classes, Shepherd and Reed continue the project of unsettling any assumption that either the experiences, sacrifices, or the gains extracted from the foul system of slavery was limited to men. Using the data in the British claims for compensation, these authors provide fascinating details about the significant compensation paid to individual women on the loss of their enslaved property at the time of emancipation. Rejecting any notion of these enslaved people as property, Samantha Longman Mills, Carole Mitchell, and Wendell Abel discuss the acute stress, deep despair, and intergenerational trauma undergone by the enslaved, particularly in their case study of Jamaica, and point to the brutality, the humiliation inflicted by enslavers who developed what they refer to as the European psychosis of white supremacy. They argue that 400 years of historical trauma require more than individual therapy, rather, a public apology, economic reparations to aid in the alleviation of economic hardships, and an acknowledgement and recognition of the suffering of the enslaved and their descendants are all part of the reparatory formula. I switch a little the order and turn next to Gregory N. Price, because he's also interested in the intergenerational impact of slavery in his analysis of Black men's economic mobility in the United States. He uses census data between 1880 and 1930 and argues that, quote, being a Black male descendant of a Black male slave father mattered and was associated with lower economic mobility and status, end quote. Centering a theoretical model which links the stigma of slavery and economic mobility and using an empirical methodology, Price concludes that, quote, the chains of slavery, its adverse effects, stretched far into the 20th century, and that this can be viewed as irreparable intergenerational harm of the system of slavery. For those who would reject the notion of a need for reparations with the claim that the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans was legal when it was carried out, Nora Whitman's contribution to the volume challenges what she calls, quote, the hegemonic denial of the right to reparations, end quote. Arguing from a foundation of international law, Whitman assesses and disputes the legal bases of the trade in enslaved Africans, the system of slavery practiced in the Americas, and the objections to reparations. She concludes that, quote, transatlantic slavery was illegal from its inception, end quote, and the violations and horrors that it visited on people of African descent can be redressed by, quote, restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition, end quote. In another close examination of legislation which could and should be related to the questions of reparations, Chris Manjapra discusses the enduring legacy of the Slavery Abolition Act, which granted £20 million compensation to enslavers for the loss of their property by incurring massive public debt. It was only in 2015, she argues, that the loan, which continued to benefit the holders of the bonds, was finally redeemed at a cost of more than £218 million paid by taxpayers. And I'd like to point out that some of these taxpayers would have included Caribbean migrants and their children in the United Kingdom who were the descendants of the enslaved. This chapter argues that the Abolition Act, quote, perpetuated a crime against humanity, the treatment of persons as mere chattel property through its very enactment, end quote, as well as the additional years of labor extracted through apprenticeship. For these acts, reparations are due. If the case for reparations can be found in the historical and legal scholarship which together outline the need for restorative justice, then the means by which repair might be effected has also been addressed in this volume. Looking at British universities, Nicholas Draper argues that it is necessary for those institutions, many of which benefited from the enslavement and the unpaid labor of enslaved Africans, to launch comprehensive research programs to examine the links between four groups: founders and benefactors, the universities themselves, the faculty or academic staff, and the students, with the benefits of slavery. Using the Legacies of British Slave Ownership project, Draper points the links between institutions like King's College London, Liverpool, Oxford, and Cambridge, and the institution of slavery. He also points to steps recently taken by All Souls in Oxford and the University of Glasgow to address reparations, as well as a growing commitment to conduct the needed research across a range of institutions. In a close analysis of the advocacy by groups including the Ethiopia Africa Black International Congress, also known as the Bobo Shanti, and the 12 Tribes of Israel and the umbrella organization of Nyabingi, Michael Barnett examines the role of the Rastafari movement in their agitation for repatriation as a means of restorative justice, as well as psychic and spiritual healing. Through a detailed examination of fact-finding missions, petitions launched, repatriation of Rastafari to Ethiopia, to Ghana, to Tanzania, Barnett argues that repatriation has a place in the reparations debate, as it has the potential to be a redemptive strategy an ideological pillar for Pan-African identity, a source of strength for oppressed and marginalized people, and a means for constructing cultural and political identity, even if that return is spiritual rather than physical. In concert with the academic research promoted by Draper and the repatriation advocated by various groups of Rastafari, as explained by Barnett, Stephen Richards analyzes the possible impact of financial reparations for the growth, economic growth, and sustainable development of the Caribbean. In the absence of reparations, Richards uses the impact of official development assistance, ODA, to measure the effect that reparations might have on the region, arguing that, quote, aid is always effective in the short term, and taking disastrous examples of misapplied aid into consideration. Richards turns his attention to the, quote, plausible heterogeneous nature of reparations payments, end quote, from different donors into a range of areas, including education, the productive sector, and economic and social infrastructure. And he argues that if carefully planned and applied, reparations can lead to sustainable growth and development. The articles contributed to this volume offer a great deal of content, innovative scholarship, and cogent argument. There are also important book reviews. Michael Barnett's review of Alfred L. Brophy's Reparations, Pro and Con, Vereen Shepard's review of Kavuma Atkeru's Making Kenke from Memory, a Sankofic Journey, Jelani Nayar's review of Ana Lucia Araujo's Reparations for Slavery and the Slave Trade. The volume also includes 5 appendices which complement and enhance the publication. There's an appendix by Maximilian Fort, who explains how a comprehensive explanation of how the machinations of colonial forces removed indigenous people from their land. There's Kenny Anthony's speech on reparations, which places the movement within the legacy of Caribbean advocacy for freedom and independence. There's Bonnie Smith's representation of a historical discussion of the church's involvement in the societies of injustice, as well as the possibility for healing through reparative pedagogy. And Dorbreen's Omar's speech, which highlights the support for reparations from the government of Antigua and Barbuda. The volume ends with Anthony Gifford's key legal aspects of the claim of reparations, which argue, first, that the claim for reparations is based on sound international law principles. Secondly, that slavery was not legal at the time it was executed. Thirdly, it is possible to prove the damage inflicted by the system if one looks at the CARICOM plan. Fourth, that there need to be clear mechanisms for reparations. And finally, that legal remedies have to be sought in places like the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. This is an important and timely publication. It is sure to make an impact on the scholarship that focuses not just on reparations, but on the history of peoples of African descent everywhere. Given the incredible benefits which accrued to those who exploited the unpaid labor of enslaved Africans and their descendants, given the violence which was visited upon the bodies and minds of people of African descent, both to extract their labor and to try to control their inherent desire for and determination to achieve freedom, given the dreadful carnage and intergenerational damage that was inflicted upon the enslaved with enduring and appalling legacies, surely an accounting must be made for this immense crime. These are the foundations from which the call for reparations have been made and are being made. These are the foundations on which the scholars whose work is featured in this special SES volume stand to make their arguments about the need for reparations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Johnson. That was an incredible review and commentary on the volume. And I want to assure the librarians who would normally be at a face-to-face book launch, journal launch, to collect their copies for their libraries, that we will ensure that they get their copies. All teachers' colleges, all the universities in Jamaica, and the National Library of Jamaica, the Library of the University of the West Indies, all the libraries we usually make presentations to on occasions like these, you will get your copy. And I know that the SES, I know that my friend Annie and also the staff of the center will ensure that this is done. So don't worry. And then for those overseas and those in Jamaica who can't get access to the hard copy, remember we told you how to get the online version. And I'm assuming that Floyd has put up the link so that you know where to go for the online journal. And Michelle, I have to tell everyone that perhaps they don't know that the first time the history department, the history and archaeology department on the Mona campus held a seminar, a panel discussion on reparation, it was Michelle and I that organized it, because we had met out at Spanish Town behind the old King's house at an event for emancipation. And I had spoken, that was my first public defense of this very important movement and cause. And Michelle said afterwards, let's do something more. Let's have a panel discussion. Let's have a big event. So thank you, Michelle. You are still in the movement. I am in the movement as well, but I think we started something in the humanities faculty. It's now the turn of Stefan Richards. Stefan is going to give the author's perspective, you know, and sort of give a commentary on behalf of the authors. He works in development finance at the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, D.C. You're not there now, right? Stefan in Washington, D.C. He currently sits on the board of directors of the IDB Group. He obtained his undergraduate degree in economics and French from Vassar College in New York. He received his MSc in development economics from the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, at the University of London, in London, UK. Stefan was born and raised in Jamaica, in Kingston, but has since lived in the United States of America, in France, and the United Kingdom. A Rhodes Scholar finalist, he has always had a high aptitude for academics and a passion for effecting positive change in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. His research has centered on avenues for socioeconomic development of the Caribbean, including the economic impact of reparations for slavery and Chinese development policy in the Caribbean. Over to you, Stefan. We have all heard about the article he wrote, which is titled, Can Reparations Buy Growth? The Impact of Reparations on Payments on Growth and Sustainable Development. You have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Professor Shepard. I'd actually like to start by thanking the organizers from the Center of Reparations Research and the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies for providing a dedicated space for us to discuss reparations, a topic that deserves much more attention than it currently receives. I'd also like to thank Professor Sir Hilary Beckles and again Professor Rain Shepard for continuing to champion the cause of reparations across the Caribbean and grounding the topic firmly in academia. In the same vein, a big thank you to each person who contributed to this publication. Finally, I'd like to thank the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, David Cameron, for visiting Jamaica and telling us to move on. He reminded me that injustice is not experienced equally and that colonialism never really ended. So we're talking about reparations today. In this case, reparations is a means to gain justice for the centuries of torment and subjugation of our people. Not only are reparations morally sound, but through my study, as we heard earlier, I found that they can be financially sustainable in the long term. But today and throughout this journal, what we're also talking about is our shared history, our shared memory, and how it has come to shape our present, our future, and even our perception of who we are. When I began preparing this brief reflection, I spent so many late nights and early mornings thinking about where to start. Our history is so heavy and so vast. Eventually, I began thinking about the moments and experiences that shaped my perception of reparations, from relative disinterest to staunch proponents. Today, I will share some of them with you. So first, I remember being 7 and foreign-minded. I couldn't wait to travel the world and hopefully trade Jamaica for somewhere up north. I used to tell people I was born in Miami, actually. Toys R Us was probably my biggest incentive at the time to move to the US. But even then, as a child, I saw the differences between an underdeveloped and developed country, though I had been unable to articulate it. I remember when I began traveling as a teenager and finally moved to the UK to study at age 17. I remember that yearning to being foreign turned to resentment. Resentment for the excess and waste all around me. Meanwhile, I tried to save every last candle bag and Ziploc I used. Resentment for having to trade warm weather for frigid winters just to get an education that would be seen as more valuable globally. Resentment for leaving my family, my community, and the only place I've ever called home, to reside in lonely cities. Resentment for the centuries of robbery and treachery that inevitably resulted in an underdeveloped global south and prosperous metropoles, full of immigrants trying to reclaim their wealth and heritage, even their artifacts. I remember visiting La Musée d'Aquitaine, a museum in Bordeaux, France. The tour guide spoke of Bordeaux's riches and their beautiful architecture, while boasting about the fact that most of these riches came from Bordeaux's heyday as a primary port in the transatlantic trade in Africa, also known as the slave trade. That is to say, most of these riches came through the trading of humans who looked just like me. When the tour guide asserted this, my classmates looked to me with pity and concern, being the only Black person in the group. But what was I supposed to do? Tell them it's okay, that I'm not angered at the sight of all this opulence, while my country, in many ways the source of the riches, suffers endlessly? I remember reading La Condition Noire by Papendiaï, an excellent study that looks into the social cost of being Black in the French colonial empire. I lived with host parents in Paris at the time, and while I was reading the book in the living room one evening, my host parent's son asked me, "Isn't it hard to read that?" I hadn't understood the question, so I plainly responded, "Not really, my French is getting better." However, I later understood that he believed that the atrocities against Black people described in the book may have been too difficult for me to grapple with. As I thought about it, I wondered, shouldn't it be hard for the children of their oppressors, the ones who have caused so much pain to several continents, to read about their own atrocities? I remember applying to an internship right here in Jamaica several years ago. The company requested that I submit a PowerPoint presentation on a topic about which I was passionate. Who told me to write about reparations? It was naively, I assumed that writing about reparations would be warmly received. Yet, a couple of weeks into the internship, one of my supervisors told me jokingly that they hired me despite my presentation. She found it strange and did not understand how one could be passionate about something that didn't make sense. In that moment, I was confused. I hadn't considered that reparations could be a divisive topic among victims as well. Finally, I remember writing the article published in this journal. It's titled, "Can Reparations Buy Growth? The Impact of Reparations Payments on Growth and Sustainable Development." And I encourage you to read it. I wrote it as undergraduate research. My advisor thought I was wasting my time. She said that I should aim to write something interesting that may be published one day, not just something I myself found interesting. After what can only be described as a protracted academic war, I was granted permission to complete this research as long as it was never called a thesis. Today, I'm grateful to everyone who has found value in creating and sharing knowledge on how to achieve justice for our ancestors or grandparents or selves. So as we sit here and discuss reparations, I do not take this space and opportunity for granted. We're discussing lives and livelihoods lost. In many cases, they were never even started. A continent in mourning for what was, and more importantly, what could have been, had it not been for the violence and hate. For all of this, we need justice, and there is no justice without reparations. Earlier this week, the US celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy. One of his messages has always stood out to me. He stated, "It's all right to tell a man to lift himself by his own bootstraps, but it is a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps." The time has come for us to reclaim our stolen boots. There is no justice without reparations. Thank you.
Wow, that was truly moving, Stefan. And you ended with, "It's time to reclaim our boots."
It is indeed time.
I really thank you for that, and hope that we can find other avenues to, air your comments. First of all, I'm happy you got the internship anyway. I don't know if you were able to convert anyone in that office to the cause. You don't have to say it now. We can speak off air. But I honor you as a young person, for sticking with the movement and for writing and writing, because not many young people understand or appreciate the reasons for the cause. And I really hope you can get some converts in your age group and younger, because, who knows what will happen to those senior people in the movement, soon. So thank you so much. Let me go to another young person, Gabrielle Hemmings. She is the research assistant at the Center for Reparation Research. She completed her undergraduate degree at the University of the West Indies at the Mona campus, where she obtained a Bachelor of Science in International Relations and Management Studies with first-class honors, and was in fact awarded the Sir Lawrence Linder Award for the best performance in the International Relations program for her entire cohort. Her research interests include global affairs, human rights, the legacies of enslavement and colonialism, global poverty, inequality, and international development. She's now going to give her own reflections as she helped to see this volume through. Gabrielle.
Thank you for that introduction, Professor Shepherd, and good afternoon to everyone tuning in with us, or participants joining in on Zoom, and or wider audience tuning in via the Center for Reparation Research's YouTube page. I am indeed honored to be invited to be a part of the launch of volumes 68, 3, and 4 of the journal Social and Economic Studies, the special reparations issue, and particularly grateful for the opportunity to have played the role as one of the primary research assistants on the production of this prolific body of work. At the beginning of my tenure at the Center for Reparation Research, one of the very first projects that I was tasked with was oversight of the completion of the special reparations issue with the Social and Economic Studies team, a task which the previous research assistant, who Professor Shepard mentioned earlier, Ms. Jodian Quarry, had already ably begun. This included, amongst other things, reviewing and aiding in the editing of articles and facilitating feasible timelines and task lists for the editing team to ensure the completion of this work. Before I could begin that process, however, in an attempt to gain a firm grip or grasp on what seemed then like a daunting project ahead, I had to have an understanding of what exactly I was working on and working towards. I remember dedicating my first few days to thoroughly reading through the entire first draft submitted to me, a draft which had been started by Jodian. I vividly remember finishing my first reading with an audible whisper of the word, wow. I was in awe of the depth and breadth of the body of work, and this was only the first draft. The truth is, I had not yet come across a body of work that provided such a wide and diverse perspective in relation to the reparation movement. This first draft drew me in and took me on such an intellectually stimulating journey, from examining the evolution of the reparation movement in the 21st century to amplifying the voice of the woman during slavery, from assessing the psychological trauma posed by slavery to elucidating the impact of the Rastafari and repatriation in the reparation movement, from assessing the legal claim for reparation to examining the role of British universities who participated in and or benefited from the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans, from looking at the intergenerational effects of slavery for Black men in the United States to examining the compensation payouts to our ancestors enslavers, and looking at reparation as a vehicle towards growth and sustainable development. In reflecting on my first encounter, I now think of that first draft as a picture puzzle, almost complete, but not quite there yet. As we all worked together to put the puzzle pieces together, we were able to add pieces to create a whole picture. Pieces that provided the indigenous voice, for instance, a voice that many believe is silent due to extinction, but is far from as we continue to tackle the myth of extinction. Pieces that provided the perspective of the church, prolific speeches given across the region, and pieces that gave a roadmap to empowering and stimulating literary works, like that of Kabu Ma'at Keruz. All these pieces have now come together to create one whole picture, a body of work that is for anyone and everyone looking to widen their perspective on the subject of reparation, a publication that can be used as a handbook, as a tool as we continue the fight for reparation with greater understanding and widespread education. A handbook that I was thankfully able to use to fortify my position as a young academic supporting the call for reparation. I am grateful for the opportunity to have played a role in seeing to the creation of the special reparations issue. I have to especially thank our guest editors, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Professor Vereen Shepard, and Professor Ahmed Reid, who worked tirelessly on editing, reviewing, and compiling the entire publication. All our contributors who submitted stellar work and worked assiduously draft after draft on completing their contributions. Ms. Jodian Quarry, whose work preceded mine and made my transition so much easier. And last but certainly not least, Ms. Annie Paul for steering the ship as editor of the Social and Economic Studies Journal, along with her team. It has been a pleasure to have worked with you all to this end. I end by saying this. My encounter with this publication moves me to say that at a time like this, we all need to, now more than ever, steel ourselves with the expert and diverse knowledge presented in this publication. To ignore it would be a disservice to self and to those who thirst for new and empowering knowledge each day, especially with regards to reparation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle, and thank you so much for what you bring to the Center for Reparation Research, your passion, your dedication, and your academic excellence. Thank you so much. I turn back to my friend, my sister friend, Kabu Maat Keru, because I think only Kabu and her poetry can settle our minds as we contemplate the end of the launch. Kabu, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Shepherd. Again, I'm really honored to be in this space and to be reading my poetry here. I want to end with a praise song from Mama Enid, which is a tribute to a woman who hid her husband in a mattress during the Coral Guns massacre of 1963 in Jamaica. She wasn't ready for the revolution, but she stepped into view to protect her man, forgotten woman, mattress in hand. Remove the springs from the old palace, a fracture in the mind, a splintering malleus. If she had a hammer, she'd rally us like Buster rallied from Arnett to Bogue, remember? What Barnett Street couldn't hold Bogue would. Wartime woman wrapped in drogue find ways out of unruly graveyards. Carried him there, though pained and scarred, or wrap the silent cot around imperial beard, secretly soldiering ancestral mausoleums, jeered, pregnant sorrowing midst homefront cares. She held his pride delicately, wove salt a monumentum of an old crucifixion. Barnett Street is a walled necropolis in Easter. There grave diggers in uniform disremember coral gardens, a potter's field, forsaken. She held his pride softly. He was her king man. To prostrate is to humiliate in affliction. The mattress must always upright stand. Tears like sepulchres do not crystallize. They look higher to cover maternal fears. For seen is still in fatal pain now ethericized. Incubated spaces, sanctum sanctorum, priests of a tabernacle, Rasta tectum, Buster had no business in her bedroom. In the Holy of Holies empty sepulchre, she carries mattresses in vitro, wrote his names on steely incubator, seared in time. Buster was the inquisitor, doorkeeper. There will be a reckoning. Sisters in Durbars, their kingman palanquin. Buster had no business in her bedchamber. His mattress is sarcophagus, remember? Her speech ancestral obelisks recreating, told her stories in cartouches for centuries, her own people of Punic faith, false memories. The bed in votive offering keeps him alive. She held his pride gently. He must survive. Enid to Geraint, her long suffering. Mother God from the holy triad excluded. Nyabingi wartime woman is wounded. Dead or alive in the second scourging, Good Friday is Rasta's disemboweling. The evening and the morning was the second day. She held his pride tenderly so as not to sway the child she carried through Holy Thursday. She knew placentation, tribulation on the Lord's day, penitent excruciation, warrior-like in solitary inquisition. He will be reborn or yet entombed. Any art and any art, fire soul, any art and any art, water soul, Magdalene of the cross, sevenfold. She told her story in royal cartouche, wrote painful memories on all she touched. He was her kingman, sans mustache. There was nothing good about that Friday. Give us Barabbas, make him pray. For hailing Rastafari, they must pay. Good Friday, crucifixion hour. Build rooms of mattresses ex vivo. The executioner is national hero. Viperous Buster must face the reckoning. Ectogenesis in the rebirthing. She held his pride tenderly in the blackness, wrapped him softly in upright mattress, kept watch like Enid Geraint in practice. The morning and the evening was the third day. Resurrection came slowly Easter Sunday. King man rebirthing from Kaya tombing. Enid must touch him, he's seen the Father. Searches his soul for the man they slaughtered. He's not there, he's risen. A drink of water. This is how she stitched back the mattress. One spring at a time till Buster's dead. Counting needle points silently in her head. If they don't pay, until her fingers bled. He held her body closely. She was his queen. From the bowels of Kaya, justice was seen. In time, they will march for repatriation like warriors demand full reparation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kabu. I'm sending applause your way. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bob.
And I hope that many of us who have listened and who didn't know about this collection of poems before will go out and buy Making Kenke from Memory, as it connects us to the memories we have lost but should not have. All that is left for me to do now is to thank the conceptualizers of this special volume, the CARICOM Reparation Commission, especially the chair, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, to thank the Center for Reparation Research and the Social and Economic Studies through Miss Annie Paul, because our interests had to meet and say yes to the idea of putting this volume together. I want to thank all the speakers today for their brilliant contributions to this launch. I thank my co-editors, the authors and reviewers, and all who helped to produce the volume, especially Salises and the managing director of SES, Ms. Annie Paul, and her staff. I found the artist, Lucille Junkere, whose work is on the cover, and the designer, Rebecca Meek. Thanks to the organizers of this event from SES and the Center for Reparation Research, including Gabrielle Hemmings and Floyd Williams. Thanks to the technical team and to you, the audience. Look out for the next publication from the center and do support the cause, a cause that was very early articulated by Sir Arthur Lewis, whose birthday we celebrate today. Reparation was very much a part of his solution to the economic crisis of the post-war Caribbean. But in his view, this burden could not be carried by the Caribbean alone. It could only be done with British input. And Professor Beckles reminded us about Labor in the Caribbean, that 1939 publication, and the words of Sir Arthur Lewis, because many of us had forgotten or had never seen his support of reparation. This is what he said. What claim have the West Indies to demand such sacrifices from the British people? Briefly this, it is the British who by their action in past centuries are responsible for the presence in these islands of the majority of their inhabitants, whose ancestors as slaves contributed millions to the wealth of Great Britain, a debt which the Caribbean have yet to repay. And so I think of all the celebrations that went on this week over at Salises and in St. Lucia with the annual lecture for Sir Arthur Lewis. And I think of these words, and I think of the Trinidadian, Sir Ellis Clark, who in 1964 echoed these sentiments. And I say, we have to ensure that these quotations are prominently displayed, because people are very selective in what they say or icon said, who said what, who was in the movement. So as I close, I say again, look out for other publications. I think the next one we're going to launch is the reparation booklet for high schools, because we cannot only speak to adults, we have to take it to the students. And so Look out for our events. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.